Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevon Odelberg, host of Kinda Murdery, a podcast that's about more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories, the unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. That's right, folks. Just like it says in the intro, I am Zevon Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. And after throwing a couple of Kinda Murdery classics at you, I do hope you enjoyed The Case of the Severed Feet. If you hadn't heard it before, I am back with brand new episodes because, well, it's what I do, but also because it is, and I'm sure you guys are as acutely aware of this as I am, it is now October. It is the start of the spooky season. We're in that part of the year that sits smack dab in the middle of Kinda Murdery's wheelhouse. And I've got a Halloween story for you today. It's a terrible, horrible story, one whose psychological effects reverberated throughout society, and that impacted the way that people parent this time of year, an impact that is still felt today. Nevertheless, I have to tell you, Halloween is my favorite holiday, and I'm stoked it's October. But I digress. You're here for the story, not my fanboy musings on spooky season. So now, if you're ready, please join me as we uncover what truths we can and solve what mysteries we may. Kinda Murderies, the real-life Candyman, a Halloween horror story, starts now. Year after year, as October begins, autumn leaves fall, and a chill creeps into the air, the ritual of Halloween takes center stage. Children, garbed in the costumes of their heroes, fantastical creatures, or spooky monsters, march down neighborhood streets with plastic pumpkins and candy bags in hand. The night is a symphony of laughter and shouts of "trick or treat" as kids knock on doors and hold out their bags for sugary offerings. For many families, the culmination of this cherished event lies in the simple post-trick-or-treat moment when the children can finally sit down and sift through their trove of candies, each one a tiny trophy of their night's adventure. True, tooth-rotting treasure. A few select pieces are chosen, the rest are saved for later days. But in 1974, for 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien, this quintessential moment of childhood joy would take an unimaginable, horrific turn. The festivities that had been a wellspring of happiness would abruptly end in tragedy. I'm about to tell you about a dark episode that prompts somber reflection on how some traditions, pure in their intent and innocent in their execution, can be marred by malevolence lurking in the shadows. For the community and for the nation at large, Timothy's story became a wake-up call, a somber lesson on the vulnerability that exists when trust is assumed rather than insured. In Deer Park, Texas, a suburban community with its own struggles and dreams, lived the O'Brien family. Ronald Clark O'Brien, the family patriarch, held a job as an optician at Texas State Optical Company. His wife Daneen and their 2 children, Timothy aged 8 and Elizabeth aged 5, completed the family unit. On the surface, they could have been any American family striving for stability and happiness. However, beneath the facade of suburban normalcy lurked a strain of desperate financial woes. Ronald was entangled in a web of monetary difficulties so severe that the family had been compelled to sell their home simply to keep afloat. These weren't mere bumps in the road. They were precipices, threatening to plunge the family into a chasm of ruin. So acute were Ronald's financial strains that they became a reoccurring topic of conversation among his circle of friends and acquaintances. Ronald alluded to an upcoming windfall, telling some people that he thought he expected to come into a sum of money by the year's end. Given the subsequent tragedy that we're about to investigate, these statements now hang in the air, fraught with chilling implications. The backdrop of financial desperation adds another layer to a story already steeped in sadness and malice. It beckons us to consider how societal pressures and material wants can warp the human psyche, potentially pushing individuals to unconscionable acts. In Ronald's case, his fiscal troubles became more than just numbers on a paper. They turned into a foreboding subtext to the tragedy that would soon unfold. In a decision that would later take on grim significance, Ronald Clark O'Brien opted to substantially increase the life insurance policies on his children. By the time mid-October 1974 rolled around, Timothy and Elizabeth each had individual coverage amounting to $40,000, a considerable sum, especially when compared to the minimal insurance held by Ronald and his wife Daneen. Ronald's decision to up his children's life insurance wasn't just an administrative change, nor was it inspired by concern for their welfare. Instead, it was a haunting clue, a disquieting piece of a puzzle that was yet to be fully understood. In the broader context of his financial difficulties, this uptick in life insurance for the children and not for the parents became a glaring anomaly. It was as if Ronald was hedging bets against fate itself, setting a stage for a windfall that was, to put it mildly, darkly opportunistic. The transaction raised troubling questions. Why would a father, beleaguered by financial instability, focus so intently on ensuring a hefty life insurance payout for his children while leaving himself and his spouse relatively unprotected? The unsettling choices that Ronald made, whether motivated by despair or malice, reiterate the disturbing notion that family bonds can be manipulated, leveraged as commodities when the soul is darkened by desperation or malevolence. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth, the all-too-common truth, that sometimes the most significant threats to a family's well-being come from within. In the months leading up to that ill-fated Halloween, Ronald Clark O'Brien seemed to develop an unsettling interest in cyanide, a chemical compound notorious for its lethal potency and its telltale almond-like bitter taste. In August of 1974, O'Brien initiated a conversation with a friend who was employed at Arco Chemical Company. The topic? The different types of available cyanide, of course. This peculiar interest didn't stop with a single conversation. He also broached the subject with his co-workers, weaving a thread of premeditation that would later cast the shadow of guilt. O'Brien's unnerving fascination with cyanide took a more concrete form when he visited Curtin Matheson Scientific Company, a chemical outlet situated in Houston. There he learned that cyanide was sold primarily in large quantities for industrial use. Undeterred, he pressed further, asking where he might acquire the deadly chemical in a smaller, more manageable amount. Each of these steps, each conversation, inquiry, and visit, forms a chilling chapter in a narrative that was quietly unfolding behind the scenes. For anyone else, questions about toxic substances might be spurred by professional necessity or perhaps by idle curiosity. But in Ronald's case, they were alarmingly focused questions, and in retrospect, laden with intent. These actions don't merely exist as isolated occurrences, they accumulate as a chilling foreshadowing, gradually sketching the outline of a heinous, premeditated act. They force us to ponder the sobering reality that people we think we know, friends, co-workers, family, might be hiding dark secrets behind the veneer of everyday interactions. More disconcerting still is the understanding that the looming tragedy was not a spontaneous act of malice, but one that was calculated, researched, and even discussed. The social fabric, so essential for trust and community, sadly, can sometimes prove to be woefully inadequate as a safeguard against hidden malevolence. On the evening of that fateful Halloween in 1974, the O'Brien family joined the Bates family for dinner at their home in Pasadena, Texas. Both families, seemingly epitomes of American suburban life, had planned for their children to go trick-or-treating together in the Bates neighborhood. The air was filled with the aromas of a home-cooked meal, the chatter of adults, and the innocent excitement of children eagerly anticipating a night of fun and candy collecting. As the two families dined, the O'Brien children, Timothy and Elizabeth, must have looked forward to the evening's adventures with a sense of pure, unadulterated joy. Their hosts, the Bates family, surely expected nothing more than a night of community, friendship, and perhaps some spooky stories to end the evening on a high note. Yet, hidden within the folds of this seemingly idyllic setup was a starkly different narrative, one that was being quietly and insidiously scripted by Ronald O'Brien. To the Bates family and anyone who knew the O'Briens, this was just another Halloween, a night like any other in the calendar of family traditions. But for Ronald, it was something far more calculated, something far more sinister. In a move that veered away from typical trick-or-treating etiquette, Ronald O'Brien led the children to a house where the lights were conspicuously off, a generally accepted signal that the homeowners are not participating in the Halloween tradition. When the door remained unanswered, the children, perhaps slightly disappointed but undeterred, moved on to the next house, expecting more fruitful endeavors. Ronald O'Brien, however, lingered at the darkened doorstep for about 30 seconds, an interval of time that would later be dissected for its ominous implications. Rejoining the group, he produced 5 20-inch-long pixie sticks, a popular powdered candy often housed paper straw. He distributed one to each child in the group, including his own son Timothy and his daughter Elizabeth. An extra pixie sticks found its way into the hands of another young boy who approached them while trick-or-treating. O'Brien explained this sudden bounty of treats by attributing it to rich neighbors, a statement that would later ripple with profound and disturbing resonance. In that moment, handing out the pixie sticks to his own children and even to strangers' children, O'Brien transformed from a participating parent in a childhood ritual to a harbinger of danger, even if the children didn't realize it. The very act of giving candy to children, a symbol of trust and communal sharing, was subverted by a mind warped by the weight of despair and obsession. And the pixie sticks, presented as gifts from generous neighbors, instead became objects of dread, their contents a mystery that only Ronald O'Brien truly understood. This raises troubling questions. We're left bewildered, wondering how the pressure of financial troubles could drive a man to exploit the trust of innocent children, his own included, and the trust of the community. How could he leverage the cover of a family-friendly holiday to perpetuate a crime of such darkness? Ronald O'Brien's actions on Halloween night stand as a dastardly testament to the vulnerability inherent in social traditions and the trust that we place in them. It's a chilling reminder that evil can manifest not just in dark alleyways or distant places, but in the heart of a community, even within a circle of friends and family. When the night's festivities had finally come to an end, the O'Brien children returned home, their bags laden with a colorful assortment of Halloween candy. Ronald O'Brien, feigning the role of a caring father, informed Timothy and Elizabeth that they could each choose one piece of candy to enjoy before bedtime. Timothy, likely with the happy anticipation that any child would have, chose the giant pixie sticks, that elongated tube of sugary delight. Yet the tube proved difficult to open. The top had been heavily stapled. Ronald O'Brien rolled the stick between his hands to loosen its contents, ostensibly aiding his son in accessing the chosen treat. Upon taking a mouthful, Timothy grimaced, noting the unusual bitter taste. His father quickly offered a chaser, handing his son a glass of Kool-Aid to wash down the powdery substance. In that moment, a father's benign act of aiding his child morphed into something deeply horrifying, a betrayal of trust that would have life-altering consequences. Not long after downing the Kool-Aid, Timothy dashed to the bathroom, overtaken by sudden, violent illness. He began to vomit uncontrollably, his small body racked with convulsions. Panic enveloped the household as O'Brien dialed for an ambulance. Despite swift medical intervention, Timothy's life could not be saved. He died within an hour of arriving at the hospital, his light snuffed out in a manner so heinous it defies comprehension. In the wake of Timothy's shocking and untimely death, a wave of palpable fear swept through the community. Parents who had just hours before watched their children gleefully trick-or-treat now eyed their candy hauls with suspicion and dread. Authorities urged the public to turn in any candy that appeared to be the least bit suspicious. The community's response was immediate and sweeping. Bags upon bags of Halloween treats were relinquished as parents grappled with the newfound realization that even the most innocent of traditions could harbor lethal danger. The results of Timothy's autopsy deepened the horror. Found in his stomach were 16 milligrams of cyanide. His blood contained 0.4 milligrams. To put these numbers in perspective, a lethal dose of cyanide typically ranges between 0.2 and 0.3 milligrams. Investigators examining the pixie sticks that Timothy consumed discovered a stomach-churning detail. The tube contained 2 inches of pure cyanide. The level of toxicity found in Timothy's system and by extension in the pixie sticks was not just lethal. It was overkill, an indication of deliberate and calculated harm. The revelation was both shocking and revolting. It sent ripples of paranoia and distrust through a community that was already traumatized. In a race against time and death, literally, Law enforcement officers scrambled to retrieve the remaining pixie sticks that Ronald O'Brien had distributed on that ill-fated Halloween night. Their efforts bore fruit, just in the nick of time. In one heart-stopping discovery, one of the pixie sticks was found actually clutched in the hand of a sleeping boy. Fate, it seemed, had intervened. The child had been unable to remove the staples sealing the deadly tube of candy. Testing of the collected pixie sticks confirmed the worst fears of investigators and the community. Each tube contained a 2-inch layer of deadly cyanide at the top, clearly indicating premeditation. This candy was meant to kill. Further investigation into Ronald O'Brien's background revealed shocking details. It emerged that upon Timothy's death, O'Brien stood to gain $40,000 from a life insurance policy, a fact his wife was entirely unaware of. This revelation provided potential motive for the unthinkable crime, and placed O'Brien's earlier financial troubles, including the sale of his family home to pay off debts, into a grim new light, or perhaps new darkness. Finally, in a discovery that sealed O'Brien's guilt, a search of the family's home turned up a knife. On the blade were traces of pixie stick sugar and plastic, linking him directly to the poisoned pixie sticks. As these facts came to light, they not only solidified the case against Ronald O'Brien, but also amplified the broader societal impact of his son Timothy's heinous murder. The poisonous candy was not just an attack on his own flesh and blood. It was an assault on the trust that bonds communities, on the innocence of childhood, and on the sanctity of familial relationships. Parents in the community were now forced to scrutinize every aspect of their lives, from the treats their children ate to the motives of their family members. The discovery of O'Brien's potential motive for financial gain through his son's death made the betrayal all the more egregious and unforgivable. When Ronald O'Brien was summoned for questioning, his behavior and responses only intensified the layers of suspicion that were rapidly closing in around him. He claimed ignorance about the origins of the pixie sticks, asserting that he did not know which house they came from and had no knowledge of the person who'd given them out. Ronald's evasive answers raised immediate red flags for investigators, given that the group of trick-or-treaters had only ventured down 2 streets, significantly narrowing the list of possible sources for the poison candy, whether from a house or an individual walking down the sidewalk. O'Brien's inability or unwillingness to pinpoint the source of the pixie sticks cast him in an even more dubious light. Here was a man embroiled in financial difficulties who stood to gain financially from his son's untimely death, and now he was failing to provide straightforward answers to simple questions. His inconsistencies not only cast doubt on his credibility, but also raised questions about the extent of his involvement in Timothy's death. All of this further eroded the already crumbling foundations of trust within the community. It had become abundantly clear that the danger had come from within, not from a faceless outsider. This internal betrayal, radiating from a figure of paternal authority, only deepened the sense of collective trauma and mistrust among neighbors and friends. When Ronald O'Brien finally pointed out the house from which he claimed to have received the poisoned pixie sticks, investigators swiftly turned their attention to its occupant, a man named Courtney Melvin. Yet Melvin provided an unassailable alibi. He had been working at Hobby Airport until 11 p.m. on Halloween night, a fact corroborated by numerous witnesses. With this alibi, Melvin was effectively removed from the list of suspects, thereby tightening the noose of suspicion around O'Brien even further. O'Brien's identification of Melvin as the source of the candy, when coupled with Melvin's airtight alibi, not only severely undermined O'Brien's credibility, but also exacerbated the community's growing disillusionment. The failed attempt to shift blame onto an innocent man, backed by a hastily fabricated story, magnified the duplicity and the sheer evil of the act. It was a stark reminder that the person responsible for this vile murder was not a distant, faceless stranger, but rather someone deeply embedded within the fabric of the community. The net of justice finally closed on Ronald O'Brien when he was arrested on November 4th, 1974, and charged with the hideous murder of his own son, Timothy. Despite the mounting evidence against him, he never confessed to the act, and entered a plea of not guilty during the trial. The courtroom was a stage where the facts met the insidiousness of O'Brien's actions. A diverse set of voices testified against him: his wife, a chemist familiar with the properties of cyanide, and co-workers who recalled his inquiries about the deadly substance. As the trial drew to a close in June of 1975, the jury barely needed any time to deliberate. In less than an hour they reached their verdict, and 71 minutes later, Ronald O'Brien, was sentenced to death. In prison, he earned the moniker Candyman, 2 words, from his fellow inmates, a title that linked him with the betrayal of childhood innocence, but also differentiated him from another notorious Texas killer named Dean Corll, known as Candyman, 1 word. That's Dean Corll, Corll. And as bad as Ronald O'Brien was, Corll was a monster of an entirely different magnitude. You can Google him if you like. I'd suggest you don't. As for this story's killer, Ronald O'Brien, his attempts to appeal his case repeatedly hit a wall of judicial finality. Each was summarily rejected. On March 30th, 1984, Ronald O'Brien faced his ultimate reckoning. For his last meal, he requested a well-done steak and a Boston cream pie. If you ask me, they should have given him pixie sticks, and nothing else. His life was then extinguished by a lethal injection, a cocktail of drugs considered even more deadly than electrocution or cyanide gas, the very poison he had used to kill his son, well, in solid form anyway. The aftershocks of Timothy O'Brien's murder reverberated far beyond his immediate family, leaving an indelible impact on the broader community and even shaping public policy. In an atmosphere thick with dread and mistrust, parents became increasingly vigilant about inspecting the Halloween candy their children collected. Houston went so far as to ban trick-or-treating for several years in the wake of this nightmarish incident. Now, I was born in 1981. Ronald O'Brien was put to death in 1984, and some of my earliest Halloween memories, during a time in my life when I have very few memories remaining, was probably 85, 86, were of my parents inspecting my candy after trick-or-treating. And although I grew up in Northern California, virtually a world away from Pasadena, Texas, my own parents' vigilance was no doubt inspired by the monstrosity of Ronald O'Brien and the tragic murder of his son, Timothy. Now, in the case of Houston, Texas, banning trick-or-treating altogether for several years following Timothy's murder, this was an understandable, stringent measure born from a collective desire to protect the community's children, but it may have been overly cautious. It's both tragic and ironic that Timothy O'Brien's case remains unique in its horror. To date, it is the only documented instance of a child being killed by poisoned Halloween candy. Yet, this singular event forever altered the lens through which we view seemingly innocuous traditions, sowing seeds of skepticism into the fertile ground of community and family trust. The case serves as a continual reminder that even rituals designed to foster joy and unity can be manipulated for nefarious purposes by individuals with dark intentions. Timothy's story is not just a harrowing chapter in true crime history. It's a commentary on how easily the bonds of trust can be fractured even within the intimate settings of family and local community, sometimes especially in those settings. It's a cautionary tale that lurks in the background of every parent's mind as they send their children off into the night with bags empty, awaiting treats. Even now, nearly 5 decades after Timothy's murder, his haunting legacy persists as a grim testament to the fragility of trust and the depths to which human depravity can plunge. I'm Zevon Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.